Hey everyone, I hope y'all are having a great day, and today I'll be reviewing A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This was one of my most anticipated books of this year, but honestly I'll just jump right into the truth and say it was also one of the most disappointing books I read this year. After the initial hype died down and I became more aware of people not enjoying it, I think a part of me knew I would feel that way too. A Court of Thorns and Roses is the first book in Sarah J. Maas's new fantasy series, and it centers around a girl named Farrah. Her poor economic circumstances force her to hunt in the woods in order to feed her starving family, and one day she kills a wolf without realizing that that wolf is actually a fairy. So because she kills that fairy, a beast comes into her cottage and basically demands a life in exchange for the life that she took. But there's a little bit of a loophole, so Farrah is actually given the choice of either dying right then and there or leaving her family behind to live in Prydian, which is the land of the Fae, forever in the home of the beast. Maybe it was just me, but when I heard about this plot, all I could think about was how contrived and convenient it was. It honestly just seemed like an excuse to have this young girl be in close quarters with a hot guy for the majority of the story. It didn't make sense to me that instead of being killed, she's given the option of going to this court of eternal spring and having all the time in the world given to her so that she can paint the days away in leisure. Like, how is that a punishment? And why is the beast so irrationally merciful in the first place? The plot made no sense. But eventually, you discover why it didn't make sense. That plot, that storyline that's on the summary, is actually just a cover-up for something else. And maybe that sounds confusing, but just know that there's a reason why the plot seems to be like the most factitious thing in the world. So this book is a mix of a Beauty and the Beast retelling and fairy folklore. The Beauty and the Beast thing, though, just doesn't click with me. I thought about this before I even read the book. The reason that the story of the Beauty and the Beast is so beautiful and so transcendent is because it conveys this gorgeous message that despite a monstrous appearance, if you learn to look deeper, you can find a heart worth loving. But that beautiful message isn't even applicable to this story, because the beast in this story is a gorgeous, powerful, royal fairy of incredible social standing and amazing magical ability. Oh, how hard it is to fall in love with that. How much of a struggle it must be to get past that appearance. Tamlin, who's the beast in the story, is beautiful, which to me ruins the integrity of the moral of Beauty and the Beast. You don't have to put any effort to find beauty in someone who's already beautiful. My main issues with this book were the characters and the plot. My issues with the plot can further be subdivided into plot as in the storyline and pacing. My issues with the characters are that Farrah was inconsistent and almost too stupid to live for so much of the book. Tamlin was questionable, and Rhysand, although perhaps the most complex character in the book, was almost painted in a romantic light towards the end, which is so wrong on a million different levels. I'll go into specifics with actual references to the book in the spoiler section, but for those who haven't read this book, that's what you need to know about the characters. The plot is slow, and nothing really happens until 66% of the way into the book. 66% of the book! That is so much investment. I was angry while reading because I had to wait so freaking long for something to actually happen. The ending was better, I thought. It was definitely a lot more engaging, and it almost convinced me to give this book 3 stars on Goodreads, but then I remembered how angry I was reading the first 66% of the book, and I couldn't give it any more than 2.5 stars. I have so many spoilery things to say, so if you haven't read A Court of Thorns and Roses yet, I would advise you to leave. I personally don't know how much I would recommend this book to others, just because I personally didn't enjoy it very much, but if you think that you have a good chance of liking this book, go ahead and pick it up. I'm not in the business of discouraging people from reading books. All I do is share my opinion and pray that I'm not offending anybody. Also, before we go into the spoiler section, I want to warn y'all, for those who haven't read this book, that it isn't exactly young adult. I think some people classify it as new adult. There's pretty graphic sexual content in this book, which I wasn't expecting. So if that's not your thing, or if you're too young for that, definitely just pass on this book. I'm going to try to cite some specific examples from the book in order to provide at least a little bit justification of my opinions. But to do that, I'm going to be spoiling stuff. So if you don't want to be spoiled, I'd advise leaving in 3, 2, 1, now. Goodbye. 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 Okay, let's discuss. First, let's talk about Farrah. She didn't make any sense. Sarah J. Maas sets Farrah up to be this huntress with great survival skills because basically her entire family solely depends on her for their survival. And yet, time and time again, she makes the stupidest decisions ever. It's like Sarah J. Maas wanted us to believe one thing about Farrah, but Farrah's actions said something completely different. It's like in Throne of Glass when we're constantly being told that Selena is the world's greatest assassin, but Selena doesn't do anything in that first book that supports that idea. It's like that, but with Farrah. She knows everyone else around her knows more than she does. They're all wiser than she is. They know better. And yet, when they give her advice or they tell her things not to do, she directly disobeys those orders. Examples include, don't try to escape Prithian. It's dangerous out there and you don't know how to defend yourself. Constantly tries to find ways of escaping. Do not seek out the cereal. Seeks out the cereal. Lock yourself in your room during Calanmai. Do not, under any circumstances, leave to join the festivities. Leaves to join the festivities. Don't drink fairy wine. Drinks all the fairy wine. She was constantly disobeying orders and consequently getting herself into horrible situations, like almost getting killed by the Naga, and she was in that horrible situation with the 3 fairies. She had no sense of survival. There's this thing called TSTL, which is a term that reviewers use to characterize protagonists when they're too stupid to live, and that was Farrah. Farrah was TSTL for so much of the book. She wasn't being brave when she was disobeying the orders, she was being stupid. It reminded me of an insurgent when Triss was constantly risking her life on every page because she thought that that was what bravery was, and Thor had to tell her, Triss, you need to stop. That's not being brave, that's being an idiot. Same thing here, Farrah was just being an idiot. There's a part on page 192 where Lucien is scolding Farrah for leaving the manor on Calanmai even though everyone told her not to leave. And she thinks, I hated feeling like a disobedient child. Yeah, well maybe you shouldn't act like one then, Farrah. It's really that simple. Farrah was also a very inconsistent character. Before she fell in love with Tamlin, she was so hot and cold. Her opinions on Faye changed on every page. And honestly felt like on every new page, a reset button was hit and all of Farrah's feelings were put on reset so that they could move in the direction that was convenient to the plot. After she fell in love with Tamlin though, she was a lot more consistent, I'll give her that much. But before that, her characterization was just all over the place. I'll give her credit for the last part of the 3rd trial when she finally figured out the last part of the curse on her own. She finally learned to listen and she realized that Tamlin's heart was made of stone. But also I thought that was a little inconsistent because I didn't understand how she could figure that kind of thing out within minutes under pressure when she literally took months to figure out the easiest riddle I've ever seen in my life. I don't know about Tamlin, you guys. I don't find him all that charming. I didn't feel the tension between him and Farrah. So when they finally got together, I thought it was a little sudden. I don't think insta-love is measured by page number, so the fact that they didn't get together until 200 pages in doesn't really do anything to assuage my insta-love concern. There was also that night of Calanmai, when he comes in and Farrah's out of her room, and there's still a little bit of that ridiculous magic in him, and he bites Farrah's neck and gives her a bruise. And both parties acted like it wasn't that big of a deal, but to me it was. I hate the idea of marking another person as your territory. And I hated that Tamlin wasn't sorry the next day, and I hated that Farrah didn't think it was something to be that concerned about. Yes, Tamlin had warned her that something was going to happen if she left her room, and yes, Farrah was once again being an idiot for disobeying direct orders, but once you're in your right state of mind again, and once you're not consumed by this ridiculous magical heat, I think it's right that you should apologize, which Tamlin didn't, which really rubbed me the wrong way. But still, I prefer Tamlin mountains more than I prefer Rhysand. Rhysand cannot be a love interest. Ever. He's destructive and he treats Farrah like a possession. He forces her into wearing scandalous clothing and he marks her with that tattoo. Have I mentioned how much I hate marking another person as your territory? He constantly drugs her with fairy wine every night and forces her to dance with him or dance for him or sit on his lap. Not to mention he blackmails her into staying with him for a week every month. First, that is so ridiculous. I don't understand why he even wants her to stay with him every month. I don't understand how this human girl can be appealing to all these high fae. Second, before she agrees, he twists her broken arm harder. So at this point, not only is he a disgusting douchebag, he's also physically violent. And if even for a second someone tries to convince me that Rhysand is a romantic lead worth rooting for, or if anyone tries to argue that Rhysand is actually a good person because he didn't have sex with her without her consent, he kept his hands on his waist and his arms, I will explode and my guts will fly all over their face. You don't get bonus points for not being a rapist. I just think anybody who finds Rhysand romantic has a very skewed perception of romance and human rights. Rhysand staggers when he sees Farrah at the end, and he leaves before she can ask him why he's acting that way. And if that happens to be some kind of romantic thing, like if it's a mating bond coming into effect, nope, just nope. Nope, I can't. Also, I feel like if Farrah were to have another love interest, it would just confirm all the trash that Amarantha was saying. Humans are so fickle. You don't truly love Tamlin. So if Farrah falls in love with someone else, Amarantha is basically right. Human love is fickle and cheap and can't maintain promises. Anyways, all that being said, I still think Rhysand is a very complex and interesting character. Nothing he does and nothing he says can excuse his horrendous actions, but he's still relatively complex. He's introduced kind of as an antagonist, but eventually you realize that he's very, very gray. There's no black and white about him, except for his clothes, those are pretty black. I'll admit his conversations with Farrah when he's not being a prick or a predator are significantly more interesting than Farrah's conversations with Tamlin. It seems like he can comfort her in a way that none of the other characters can. Rhysand is fascinating, I'll give him that much. My favorite character is probably Lucien though. He was a lot of fun, and although he's my favorite character, I don't really have that much to say about him. So let's move on to the plot. I think the plot can be divided into before the curse is revealed and after the curse is revealed. The curse was explained after 66% of the book, which was way too long to wait in my opinion, because then the first 66% of the book, the reader is left questioning how this completely illogical plot is functioning. For the first 66% of the book, I was so angry at the plot because it was so dull and illogical. Nothing made sense and nothing was happening. Then the curse was explained and it excused things a little bit. But the curse was explained through pages and pages of dialogue from Alice, which was lazy writing in my opinion. To have this tense moment of Farrah returning to the manor and finding it completely destroyed, suddenly be interrupted by pages of monologue given by a single character, really didn't work for me. Even after the curse was explained, the plot still didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Amarantha is our villain, and she is supposedly super powerful, but she's defeated within seconds. It's never really explained how she got the land in the first place. Saying that she tricked everyone is not an explanation. So I really don't understand how she's so powerful and how she arouses so much fear in all of the characters when after Tamlin gets his powers back, he destroys her in seconds. I don't know why she even let Farrah attempt to earn freedom back for Tamlin's court. It did not align with her character to let Farrah out with the trials or with an extremely elementary riddle when she could have just tortured her for months to her amusement. It did not make sense for someone to be characterized as someone extremely ruthless to give Farrah this option of reprieve. And through a riddle of all things. And not only that, even in the trials, one of the trials was a riddle. It didn't make sense because clearly she's not a merciful person. And I understand that she likes games, and I guess the trials could be seen as a sort of game for her, but clearly more than she enjoys games, she enjoys torturing people, as you can see with the fact that she wears a ring with Julian's eye in it, and the fact that Clara's body is so disgusting and mutilated. I don't remember if her name is Clara, but you know what I mean. She likes torturing people violently and physically. That's how Amarantha gets her satisfaction, so it doesn't make sense for her to give Farrah this easy way out. The trials were fun to read, definitely the highlight of the plot, I thought, but they were also unnecessary because the riddle that Amarantha gave was so ridiculously easy. The first time I read through it, I was like, love? The answer is probably love. And I continued reading, and it was love. The answer was love. It was absolutely insane to have the riddle be so easily solvable and so transparent, but not have Farrah be able to solve it in a decent amount of time. She had to go through all the trials, she had to kill those two innocent fae, in my opinion, for no reason. Sure, the fact that the answer to the riddle was love lends itself to the idea that to some degree the story is a retelling of a fairy tale, and in fairy tales love is always a very distinct theme. But the beauty of a retelling is that you have so much creative liberty. You only have to borrow the elements that you want to. So you don't have to work in cliches if you don't want to. I want to talk about the writing for a second. I thought Maas's descriptions would never end. She constantly had to bring in painting. Constantly. I was so sick of it. Like, we get it. Farrah likes to paint. You don't have to bring it up every time Farrah sees something with colors. Oh, and Sarah J Maas abuses hyphens in this book, and I particularly notice this because in my writing I use a lot of hyphens too, and no one around me really uses hyphens, so in my mind hyphens are kind of my thing, so I always notice when other writers use them. And I remember on one particular page Sarah J Maas used 7 hyphens on one page. On one page. That is overkill. There were also little parts in the writing that didn't make sense to me. They didn't seem to be very consistent. So on page 172, Tamlin kisses Farrah's bloody hand, and it says, "When he withdrew, my blood shone on his mouth." Again, the fact that he has blood on his mouth is emphasized when the book says, "the red of his blood-covered lips." So clearly, Tamlin has a bloody mouth, but then at the bottom of the page, it says, "Slowly, as if giving me time to pull away, he brushed his lips against my cheek." Gross! You did not just kiss her with bloody lips. What? Another example is on page 379. This is after Tamlin and Farrah stupidly decided to make out in the dark hall during one of the fairy parties. And the book says, "The High Lord never took his eyes off my face as he straightened his tunic and hair, then retrieved and fastened his belt again. The paint on his hands and clothes, paint from me, vanished." So somehow magically the paint on Tamlin is gone. But then on page 384, Farrah says, "It wouldn't have taken much to figure out whom I'd been with, especially not once they saw the paint on Tamlin." But there's no longer paint on Tamlin, so that didn't really make a lot of sense to me. Okay, so now that I've aired out all my grievances, I'm going to talk about the things that I liked, because there were things that I liked. I liked the family dynamic a lot, especially with her sisters, Nesta and Elaine. I loved Nesta a lot. I really appreciated how much more there was to her than meets the eye, and I loved Elaine and her hope. Farrah's sisters were so interesting, and I really appreciated that Maas gave each of them more layers than what was shown at the beginning of the book. Like I mentioned before, I loved Lucian, and I liked reading about the trials. I thought the most exciting trial was definitely the first one with the giant worm and that maze. The giant worm part reminded me of the Infernal Devices. There were a couple of things in this book that reminded me of different books. The smudge of paint indicating that Tamlin had kissed Farrah reminded me of a very similar scene in The Winter's Crime by Marie Rukowski when Kestrel has this golden glitter on her, and after Aaron kisses Kestrel, he has gold glitter on his face, which is obviously very incriminating. Then the hand to the mouth and then in the air gesture that the fairies did after like the third trial, I think, reminded me, of course, of the Hunger Games. So I think that's all I have to say about this book. I don't think it was for me. I personally didn't enjoy it very much. I just personally saw too many issues with it, but I can see why other people would like it. If other readers don't get bothered by the same things that bother me, I could see how they would enjoy it. It wasn't my cup of tea. I don't think I'll be continuing on with this series, but let me know what you thought of this book in the comments. I would love to know. Did you have similar problems with it, or did you love it completely? I would really love to hear y'all's thoughts. So thanks so much for watching. I hope y'all have a great day and happy reading. Goodbye! I also wanted to talk about the fact that her name is Farrah, spelled F-E-Y-R-E. Faye. Faye is in her name, and Faye is another word for fairy, like in the Iron Fae series by Julie Kagawa. That is so ridiculous to me, because Farrah is not like an actual name, I don't think. I think it's just something that Sarah J Maas made up for the sake of this story. So she literally consciously made up a name that had the name of the paranormal creature from the series. Can you imagine if that happened in any other book? Like, what if in Twilight, Isabella was actually named Is a Vampire? I just thought it was really funny and a little ridiculous. Farrah is a vampire. No, I can't.